Welcome to Soccer Morning on NASN. Here's your host, Jason Davis.
Happy Friday, everybody. Jason Davis here with you on Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network. Back to our usual music just for today. Just for today. We'll get back on the DJ for a day program next week. We're sorting out all of those scheduling issues. Lots of people contributed to the show, the Indiegogo campaign, so we're working through all of that. Thank you very much to everybody that did. By the way, if you're interested in the music we've been playing this week, courtesy of our listeners, I put together a Spotify playlist because somebody asked. I don't know. You don't have to go. I mean, come on. It's the World Cup song for England in 1990, and then a bunch of other songs that nobody really cares about. Because what's important is those World Cup songs. And it makes me wonder, because I have another one I may play today for Colombia for this year's World Cup, sent over by listener Luis. Why does the United States not have an official World Cup song? You think in a country that loves to market everything within an inch of its life, that somebody somewhere would have said, let's get together an official USA World Cup song. Not the FIFA World Cup song, not the official song for the entire tournament, a USA World Cup song. Remember we had a couple years ago, we had Rivers Cuomo do a song. What was that called? And in 2010, obviously, we had Deuce doing, or 2006, sorry, we had Deuce doing Don't Tread. Rivers Cuomo had a song. I can't remember what it was called. He referenced a bunch of players. It was obviously about soccer. He's a big soccer fan, big USA fan. Where's our song? And who do you want to do it? Who should be the artist tapped to do the official USA World Cup song? Get me on Twitter, Soccer Morning. Call me, 347-756-6276. We can talk about this. We can figure this out, guys. And then we'll start an email campaign. Maybe we'll go do an online petition. We'll do an online petition to get whatever artist we choose to do the USA World Cup song. Because how can we go we don't have a mascot. We've already talked about that. Japan's got Pikachu. I saw a concept for a Portuguese World Cup mascot. It was weird. I don't think it's going to be official. It was weird. The USA doesn't have one of those. And we don't have an official World Cup song. We need something to send those guys down there. You know, we're behind you. Here's our song. Pitbull does everything. Maybe Pitbull can do it. And they could tie that into a whole Miami soccer thing with David Beckham. And yeah. No? Something like that. Let's do something like that. Today's show, Friday edition. I love just chilling a little bit on Friday, but we've got two very good discussions coming up. First, Elliot Turner, Foot Fanatico on Twitter. You should know him. You should love him. If you don't, please go follow him. He has an interesting piece up at The Guardian on the immigrant influence in the U.S. national team, the hyphenated American influence in the U.S. national team. That's what I'm going to say. So we'll talk to Elliot about those identity issues. Look, I mean, this is a team that will always have this immigrant element. Immigrant, for lack of a better word. Is Julian Green an immigrant? No, not really. He's something else. But we can say it that way. And clearly there's a long history of U.S. soccer relying on people who were born other places and ended up here. Joe Gaijin was from Haiti. Ed McIlvaney was Scottish. We know about the modern era and the Thomas Dooleys and the Ernie Stewarts. Those guys will always be part of this team. So we'll talk through those things with Elliot Turner in just a couple of minutes at 10:10. Top of the next hour, Eric Gomez will join us to talk about Mexico's roster for the USA-Mexico friendly next week in Arizona. We'll talk a little bit. I have to ask Eric about some of the issues with fan violence that have popped up in Mexico. We'll check to see if any of those teams that aren't paying their players are now paying their players. Always good stuff with Eric. So stay tuned for that at 11 o'clock. I was going to start today's show with some talk about Brazil and the preparations for Brazil and where we stand. 76 days until the World Cup in Brazil. If I have my countdown correct, I'll only have to check out FIFA.com. 70-something days until the FIFA World Cup kicks off in Sao Paulo. Now, according to this story I'm reading at Bloomberg.com, Jerome Valcke has said FIFA needs to rethink the way they prepare for World Cups in light of everything that's happened in Brazil. And the whole world looks at him and goes, you think? Really? Is this something you guys should figure out in the future? It's a lesson, and definitely we will act differently, and we will have to find a different way of working in Russia in 2018. Valcke told a press conference in Rio. We are late, and we will have challenges. We will have a lot of work, and we will have potentially some risk coming at the last minute because we have not tried all the facilities. That's an understatement. The story goes on to talk about the issues in Sao Paulo and Porto Alegre, where local stadium operators have said they won't assume the cost of installing temporary facilities after initially signing contracts to do so. Valcke said it takes 90 days to install structures such as cabling for television broadcast, security screening areas, and marquees for corporate corporate partners. The marquees for corporate partners that we can do without. The rest of that, that's essential stuff. That's things you have to get done before the World Cup comes to Brazil. They have projects that are due for the World Cup that have yet to be bid upon. Is that not a problem? I mean, come on. That's a problem. In Sao Paulo, where construction is continuing on installing seats and completing the roof, a deal has yet to be reached over who will pay for some work. Valcke said he expects an agreement soon and added that Odebrecht SA, the company responsible for the $355 million arena, will also build FIFA's facilities there. Odebrecht spokesman Marco Antonio Antunes said in an interview 2 days ago that the company wasn't contracted as yet. They haven't been contracted to do the work that Valcke says they're going to do 76 days ahead of the World Cup. Several contractual obligations signed by host cities have yet to be fulfilled, with some of them refusing to go ahead on parts of the work. National and local governments have come under pressure following protests during last year's Confederations Cup, a World Cup warm-up event where demonstrations railed against the amount of public money being spent. It's costing the country about $11 billion. Now, this is right along, parallel to protests happening right now or happening yesterday in Sao Paulo. I saw a tweet yesterday, and I'll admit that not on top of this as I need to be. You get wrapped up in the games that are happening and the preparations and rosters and who's going to be on the World Cup team for this country or that country. They had their fourth anti-World Cup protest. Now, are these people that are going to be able to be heard? Has the movement been annexed and sort of taken over by elements that are less serious? I don't know. But this tweet looked serious, and the banner looked serious. The banner that said, FIFA go home. And it didn't look like a small amount of people. It wasn't the millions or hundreds of thousands, that took to the streets during the Confederations Cup. But it wasn't a small amount of people. And it's not that we don't expect everything to be fine when we get there. So it shouldn't be at this point. And FIFA knows it. And they're going to have to figure it out. And Sepp Blatter is going to avoid speaking ahead of the World Cup because he doesn't want to be booed. Because he knows. It's going to be crazy. World Cup in Brazil. It's coming, guys. It's going to happen. How good is it going to be? For us watching on television, I'm sure it'll be fine. If you're trying to fly within Brazil, yeah, that's a different story. Let's take a break. When we come back, Elliot Turner, Foot Fanatico. You know him, you love him. We'll talk to him about identity in the U.S. men's national team. Excellent piece over at The Guardian. Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV. Stay there.
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on NASN with Jason Davis.
Joined now on the telephone by, I'm going to call him a friend. I don't think I've ever actually met him in person, but yet he's one of those guys in the soccer bubble of America that if you're smart, you're following him. It's Elliot Turner, Foot Fanatico on Twitter, footfanatico.com, author of a very good piece at The Guardian, which we're going to talk about now. Hi, Elliot. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great, Jason. How about you?
I'm good. Now, Elliot, you have used the news of Julian Green's decision to represent the U.S. men's national team as an opportunity to speak about U.S. soccer, the national team, immigration. I called them hyphenated Americans. Give me the sort of the thought process as you approach this piece in light of what Julian Green decided.
Well, I like the term hyphenated Americans just because obviously one of the biggest comments and feedback we got on this piece was that, hey, Julian Green is not an immigrant. He's a dual citizen.
Right.
So we took great pains. I mean, if you read the headline, the byline, and the terms used, we always refer to sort of dual passport players, but I think that there's this feeling that they're sort of like immigrants in the sense that Julian Green could decide to play for the U.S. or Germany. He's making a decision where he wants to sort of put his soccer future. Mm-hmm. And then on like a totally technical matter, I know the situation because my brother has had kids abroad. When you're born to an American citizen abroad, and Julian Green was born in Florida, so it's not a situation, but for some of the other players like Jermaine Jones, there's still like a huge hassle to get the American passport. Mm-hmm. You have to like prove that you yourself lived in the U.S., so it's like not quite an immigrant, not quite a full citizen.
Right.
So we have these sort of players in this nether region, and I was kind of curious. I did some sort of research in terms of like the U.S. roster for the World Cup and World Cup qualifying, the 1950s and the 1990s, 94, 98. And I just sort of wanted to see the composition of U.S. soccer and see how many players we had who were either the children of immigrants or were immigrants themselves, like Pablo Mastroeni, who was an Argentine, or Tab Ramos, who was Uruguayan. And then obviously the sort of dual citizens, players like David Regis, who's French, who decided to play for the U.S., and sort of just see how they've contributed to U.S. soccer through the years, and sort of look at different coaches and their sort of approaches, and how that sort of affected the roster, where sort of maybe Bruce Arena was very happy with the talent level in MLS, didn't want to really do too much scouting, whereas Jurgen Klinsmann has been a cheerleader for dual national players.
I like how you Americanized David Regis' name. I like that.
Hey, I will not pronounce French correct unless I'm talking to a Montreal Impact fan. Then I will respect the French. Only if it's Quebecois. Yeah. Only the Quebecois French.
Up there in Montreal. All right. There are obviously different little categories here. I think it's fair to sort of, grab all of these guys and talk about the influences of other countries on the U.S. national team. I mean, for what, as you point out, we're all immigrants on some level, unless you are a Native American, and so there's an immigrant element to everybody involved. But a guy like Julian Green, dual international, born here but dual international, and raised in soccer. I'm going to say it this way: raised in soccer in Germany, to me, is significantly different than Pablo Mastroeni or Tab Ramos, who were immigrants but were raised in soccer here.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and it definitely is like very interesting situations where you have those South American players. I think another player, Claudio Reyna, was born here, but his mom was Portuguese and his dad was an Argentine pro.
Right.
But he played for UVA for Bruce Arena before he went abroad. So that's another sort of player who's here, second generation immigrant. Or first generation American, whatever you want to call them, who's like sort of raised in American soccer. Whereas what's interesting for me is the sort of, I mentioned it in that piece as well, the Giuseppe Rossi story, where it's like he's here, he's American. If you follow his Twitter, he obviously feels American. Like I have so many friends. I'm sure you're friends too from like the Jersey Shore, and you're just like, why do you love this place? Like seriously, like what's in the drinking water there? What's going on? But then like if you look at his history though, like from 9 onward, he was like going to Italy for camps and participating. So it's sort of like he's an American who was raised in sort of like Italian soccer. So yeah, it's very interesting in terms of like how much credit we want to get, and sort of how sort of one of the things I didn't get into the piece was the effect of sort of, if we're just going to sort of start going heavily after dual national players. How does that affect kids in the academy who are growing up and thinking, well, why would I want to go to an MLS academy when I just have to go to Broad to get a look at?
It's difficult because I approached, I don't know how often you've heard me talk about these things, Elliot, but I on a regular basis, I'm sort of approaching these issues, and I'll admit that it's difficult to pin. They're slippery. These are slippery things to consider. And Cole on Twitter, who I think is, I'm not sure if he's read the piece, and we just sort of addressed it. The word immigrant kind of throws it off a little bit. He says, this guy's flat wrong. Immigration is the wrong word. Green is a citizen born in Florida, was never an immigrant. But I think that in the spirit of what you're saying,
I'm having some trouble hearing you, Jason.
Okay.
Could you repeat that? Sorry.
Well, no, we had a listener sort of respond to the word immigrant as you used it in relation to Julian Green. And clearly Julian Green's not an immigrant. But when we talk about the national team and we talk about where these guys are come from, we're not necessarily, it's not just necessarily just about their citizenship status or I don't know. Again, these are slippery issues that we're dealing with here, Elliot. I'm fascinated by the notion of what makes the American national team American. Is it a piece of paper? Is it where these kids learned where these guys learned how to play soccer? Is it something else fundamental? Is it something in their heart that we can't know? What is it?
Exactly. That's sort of a great question, and I think that soccer definitely can make us look at America ourselves, like writ large, and like, are we still a nation of immigrants? Are we starting to develop our own sort of like identity? Is there, there's always sort of nativists and xenophobes. Ben Franklin would just be pissed as hell that Julian Green was on the team and Jermaine Jones because he was a racist against Germans. He hated German Americans speaking German, so there's lots of tensions between, like, is America sort of a cosmopolitan sort of tossed salad of people from different countries who sometimes get along, sometimes have their own sort of little barrios or neighborhoods, or is it like there's this, like Americana Anglo from the Midwest where I grew up who's like 6'4", blue eyes, blonde hair, 190 pounds. So
yeah, look,
there's a lot of tension there in soccer and in the U.S. at large.
I think that it's good to celebrate all of the diversity that's possible in this team, which is in its own way a microcosm of America, and also identify the fact, Elliot, I don't know how you feel about this. You're a Midwest guy. You've lived in a lot of places, Central America, Texas, and everything else. I tend to feel like some of this diversity is I'm not going to call it a weakness because I don't look at it that way, but I do think that it hampers sort of the idea of a national soccer identity that Jurgen Klinsmann talks about all the time. How can you develop a style or a cohesive sense of one when you're bringing in guys from all these disparate places?
I think that's a really good point, because I think in terms of watching Klinsmann's tactical development and how to really get article on this, I think by Matt Doyle, where it was like he came in and he wanted to play sort of a German approach, which was very much the ball on the carpet, very precise, very technical, keep the ball, press high up the pitch. And we have these players who, for the most part, who were developed and we were used to just sort of like get the ball to the flanks, run cross, counterattack, defend in numbers. And it was just like really interesting seeing him trying to fit these players into like how he wanted to play, and then seeing all these like, mistakes passing out of the back. And then looking at the national team now, just trying to mix sort of some of the German players in their approach, because they learned in German soccer and how they want to play versus some of our like quality, very good MLS players like Matt Beasley or Omar Gonzalez, who maybe have sort of different ideas in their head on where the ball should go when they recover it, or where they should be standing at certain positions and in certain moments. So it's been very interesting seeing how Klinsmann has been trying to sort of mix all these players together that have, as you have have been sort of grown up and learned soccer in different ways.
Mm-hmm. You point out, you point out the history of the national team, and I think that there's this sense. And just I threw out some names. Obviously, Joe Gations was a Haitian of German descent. You point that out. There were 3 Italian Americans in the 1950 team: Ed McIlvaney, obviously in the modern era, Tab Ramos and Ernie Stewart, and all of these guys. There's a sense that there's sort of this upward progression always with U.S. soccer, that it's always supposed to get better over the previous generation, and I'm not sure that that's the case. And in this area as well, sort of the notion is, well, America should be developing more of its own players. Again, not to make it out that Julian Green and Jermaine Jones shouldn't be in this team, but just sort of saying this country should be spitting out this talent so that we won't have to quote unquote rely on these guys. Is that the right way to look at it at all?
I think that's a fair way to look at it, in the sense that what's frustrating right now is that I think MLS is taking great pains and has invested heavily in academies and is trying to produce some pretty good players. And before that, there was Bradenton, which was a step in the right direction. But it's sort of frustrating that we don't get what you might want to call them homegrown players, that we still sort of have to sort of look and get sort of like the German second tier, like the German B team, and try to beg and get 19-year-olds to come to play for us, because we don't yet have the academy system in place where we're like sort of regularly producing players of that technical and tactical capability. But on the other hand, I mean, if you look at the history of American immigration policy, it's always been kind of bipolar, where like sometimes we love you, open doors, open borders. Other times it's like, no, we have enough immigrants, like we don't want any more. So it's been interesting with U.S. soccer, because there really was an era in 2006 where Pablo Mastroeni was the sort of only individual on there who was an immigrant. The rest, it was all just sort of straight MLS players, born and raised. And I don't know if you recall 2006, but I don't have very fond memories from that tournament.
No, you know what? I blank out most of it. I recall, the only thing I really recall from 2006 is watching the final, because I honestly don't want to remember exactly what happened there. And again, but we're not drawing a straight line between the number of immigrants and the success of the team, but it is sort of interesting to point out, as you said, Bruce Arena's approach as opposed to Jurgen Klinsmann's approach. Clearly, Bob Bradley laid some of the groundwork for bringing in some of the German Americans. Jermaine Jones made his debut under Bob Bradley. Let's remember that. But it's taken a different step, and I think it's interesting, Elliot, to ponder how Klinsmann and any subsequent national team coach has to balance out the idea of, let's go after these dual internationals, because look, they're American. If they want to play for us, that's great. Let's bring them in, that are raised, say, in the Bayern Munich system, and whether or not they're fundamentally better than the MLS option. And sort of, I think it's easy to sort of get entranced by the pedigree or the name that's behind it. And I'm not saying this about Julian Green. I'm just saying it in general. Behind a young player, when there may be, and it's not about Americanness necessarily, but it's about, what's here in front of us versus what's the thing that we want, the thing we have to go chase.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, in the sense that, every country, in 18, 19 tournaments, you never know how they're going to turn out. Like, we have our own Freddie Adu, who's sort of on his journey right now. But then if you look at Brazil, Pato, Gonzo, those guys aren't exactly like lighting the world afire. So I think no one really knows, how good Julian Green is going to be. I mean, I think right now we know sort of that he's got a really high roof, but we don't know how close he's going to get to touching it. One of the first interesting things was, one of the first versions of this article I wrote was, there's a little bit of March Madness fever, and I thought I focused much more heavily on sort of Klinsmann, Bradley, and Arena and Sampson recruiting tactics as compared to like college basketball coaches like Roy Williams and Bill Self, and sort of the idea of maybe it's sort of like American stubbornness, but like, why do we really have to sort of go out and kiss up to these people and make promises, like tell these 17-year-olds, oh, you're going to be in the World Cup on ESPN and you're going to be a starter? Because I know that in 1998, Steve Sampson will swear that he didn't promise David Regis a starting spot on the team, but he got nationalized right before the World Cup. He played a few friendlies, he started every single game, and what's interesting too is like there's playing style concerns, but there's also like locker room chemistry, like bringing someone in the last second who like maybe doesn't deserve it, or displacing maybe a veteran who has a lot of respect. So it's an very interesting dynamic. I'll be very interested to see how Julian Green performs and if he does end up going to the World Cup.
Yeah, in this situation, look, there's already a cadre of German Americans, guys who grew up in Germany, who can relate to Julian Green on a level that no one could relate to David Regis on his level back then. And there's also a difference. And again, it gets a little slippery, but I think it's pretty clear that naturalizing a guy who's married to an American is what they did with David Regis is different than bringing in a guy who was born in Tampa, whose dad is a major part of his life and lives here and he visits here, and he's certainly been exposed to being American and may feel American on whatever level he feels appropriate. We certainly see this with Terrence Boyd. Those are different things.
Oh yeah, I mean every one of these situations. What really got me was just sort of how interesting and unique all of them were. Like the situation with Preki was interesting in the sense that like he was able to play for the U.S. because he married an American wife, but he played indoor soccer for 6 years. Anyone who plays indoor soccer for more than 4 years should just get like a green card and just be like rewarded for all their service and the pain they've suffered for American soccer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you slogged it out in indoor soccer in the late 80s and early 90s the way that Preki did, absolutely. You deserve a medal for hanging in there and then making the transition to outdoor and being pretty damn good. But, and again, we want to, as an American, I want to embrace the idea of the immigrant coming here and discovering an opportunity and making a life. And that has a part to play in sort of how we parse out these national team issues. I mean, it's easy to say, well, David Ruggie was naturalized at the last minute and may not have been American in the sense that we want our national team to be American. But as you mentioned, Preki got naturalized. I mean, it's the same sort of idea, except from what we saw, Preki was all in. Preki was 100% American, feels 100% American today as he goes about being part of the American soccer community. So who's to decide? There's no easy way to arbitrate this guy deserves it or should be in the team and this guy shouldn't.
Yeah, and it's very interesting too because FIFA has they have like the one-time switch rule, which is pretty recent, but was like a big deal. But then they also have like a pretty loose standard for who can play for a team and who can't. And there's questions as to whether U.S. soccer should expand who can play to lawful permanent residents, just because sometimes the slog to citizenship can take several years, and when your careers between 5 to 10 years, waiting 5 years to become a citizen is just too long.
We have those examples of guys that, and this is part of the fascination with young, exciting players, and who knows, but when we see that Aaron Johansson is eligible to play for the United States right now, files his one-time switch and he's eligible. Same thing with Julian Green, and yet Diego Fagundes has to wait, and if he ends up having a change in his career and gets an opportunity overseas, it might be over for him in terms of representing the United States. And currently, and it's on my list today, Gideon Zelalem is a fascination, not a citizen, lived here for 8 or 9 years from about the age of 10. He's not a citizen, he's not eligible, and yet someone who barely stepped foot in this country is. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's sort of American immigration, the cornerstone of American immigration policy. If you're born here or born to a U.S. citizen, you're a U.S. citizen, birthright citizenship. So, from a meritocratic sense, it's like meritocracy versus the lottery of birth. Another situation that's interesting for me, and I don't know more details, is that, Freddie Montero's tearing it up in Portugal. He lived in the U.S. for a long time. He played it straight, and he made an American. So I was like, oh, man, I would love to see Freddie Montero play for the U.S., even though he's already played for Colombia. I thought he was a great forward. I loved watching him with the Sounders, and he's doing great in Europe.
Sure, and again, while we want, and I'm certainly on board with bringing in the most talent possible, because for me, sort of the ends justify the means in terms of pushing the program forward, getting more recognition for soccer. The better the U.S. does at the World Cup, the more mainstream media pays attention, the more the American populace pays attention. That benefits soccer in the long run. But then if you bring in a guy like Freddie Montero, say he was eligible through whatever process, or I don't know, there's some other guys that you could put on that list. Does that make us question sort of how we feel about American soccer growing in this country? Because Freddie Montero is Colombian born, Colombian raised, and there are those examples, and it's tough because you don't want to say, well, we want only guys who learns how to play soccer here, because that's not America. That's not how America works. But it does say something about American soccer when we get guys like Luis Gil, for example, who could explode on the scene having been raised in America.
Oh yeah, I think every time I sort of mentioned Landauven, probably the greatest U.S. player ever. But he played youth ball in California, but he cut his teeth and got a lot of key experience, like at Bayer Leverkusen before coming back to MLS.
Sure.
Whereas, conversely, St. Dempsey, very good player, had a great career. He played for Furman in New York, played for the Dallas Texans youth team. Dempsey's a pretty American product. So it's it's a very interesting situation in terms of like how, we want to have like, I feel like I want to put like a made in America stamp on players and be like proud
Right.
and shine them out at the World Cup. But, it's such a cosmopolitan and global game that I'm not sure if we're ever going to have like that great player who like was born in America, American citizen parents, played straight MLS youth ball and only MLS career all-star and like lights up the World Cup.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd love to see it happen, but I'm not sure if it's going to happen just because of the nature of the game.
Yeah, man, we're moving more to a situation where players are more mobile than ever, even at young ages. And yeah, FIFA's got rules, and you can't leave until you're 18, and et cetera, et cetera. But we're probably more likely to see, if let's say Gideon Zelalem becomes, I'm not putting this pressure on him, but he's out there, he's at Arsenal, everybody knows his name. If he becomes a superstar, if he becomes an Iniesta level superstar in the world game, how much ownership of, and whether he represents the United States or not is sort of immaterial to my question, but let's say he doesn't. Let's say he represents Germany. How much ownership of his talent does American soccer have?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a tough question, and it's one of those tough things too, where I've always felt like there's sort of the tension between having the systems in place where you have like elite academies, elite coaches, elite scouts, versus just like sort of the lottery of the individuals. Like every time a country wins the World Cup, like when France won the World Cup in 1998, there were all these articles afterwards about how like, oh, France's youth academy is like fantastic, and that's the same with 2006 but then it's like, well, what about like 2002 when they go to shit? It's like the same coaches, the same youth academy. Like, what about 2010 when they have a fucking strike on their bus? Like, are we going to blame the youth coaches? Are we going to fire? Are we going to chop some heads off down there? Like, so I think the U.S. is slowly getting the infrastructure in place to have like the academies where we'll be able to find the talent, groom it, but ultimately it's the players who have like the power in their hands, which is one of the things I've really liked about sort of Klinsmann's, the words he said, the approaches he said, and I've seen it in my son's own youth team where the coaches are very much like, you will be as good a player as you want to be. You must work hard. Like they can give you the tools, but you're the one who's got to do like the sweating.
It is interesting, and look, Belgium is sort of the dark horse darling of this World Cup, despite the fact they've never done anything or made any noise in a World Cup because of all of that talent that's coming through. But if we saw that in the next cycle or two cycles from now, Belgium has failed to produce anything close to what they've got right now in Hazard and Fellaini and Lukaku, then we wouldn't necessarily be surprised, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, okay, well, is it the youth coach's fault? Is this next generation is like not as good?
Yeah.
Just sort of the way things coming away. It's like, I mean, we're still benefiting from the first brains in class. I mean, Kyle Beckerman. I remember it was like a youth Olympic tournament where like Landon Donovan, Oguchi Onyewu, Kyle Beckerman, DeMarcus Beasley, all those guys had great tournaments, and we're still benefiting from that. So I'd like to think we get the system in place where we can be competitive and be good, but sometimes you just have a golden generation. You just got to enjoy it and hope they go as far as they can.
It is. It's fascinating. Go check out Elliot Turner's piece at The Guardian on immigration. Again, look, don't take issue with the words. Read the piece for the spirit of it and what Elliot's trying to get across. And certainly the history is fascinating. And follow Elliot on Twitter at FootFanatico. Elliot, appreciate the time, man. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. Take care, Jason.
There he goes. Elliot Turner. Again, fascinating follow. Check out his blog as well. It's a difficult question. I mean, the reason I reached out to Elliot after he wrote this piece is because this hits me right where I live, constantly thinking about these issues. And again, I'm not making any hard and fast judgments. No one's going to stand up here and say Julian Green shouldn't be representing the United States. Jermaine Jones shouldn't be representing. I'm not doing that. They're Americans. They should be representing the United States if they are better, if they're better than the rest of the pool. I mean, if they're good enough, essentially, is what I'm saying. They should be. And that's Klinsmann's job as the head coach, to put together the best possible team. If that happens to be 5 German Americans, so be it. Let's focus on making things happen here with our young talent, and maybe there'll be less, maybe there'll be more. Again, we sort of have to take all these pieces and put them together in some order that not only makes for a good team, but sort of lets us view the wide picture of American soccer and what it is, and really assess sort of how we feel about these identity issues. Are they, first of all, you might not have any problem with any of this. This might not be an issue for you at all. If you are a citizen and eligible by the FIFA rules, you're in the team if you're good enough. That's the way it is. That's the way it should be, is what I'm saying. But again, because we're an aspiring soccer nation, because the game has a long way to go here in terms of growth, when we have the opportunity for a young player who learned how to play here to be in the team and be a star, there's just that extra little element of maybe not pride. Hello, you're on the air. Okay, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Last chance. 5, 4, 3. All right, you're gone. Go ahead and give us a call, 347-756-6276, if you have thoughts on this discussion. I mean, look, as sports fans, the bottom line is you want your team to be the best possible team. If that means that we had a team of 11 starters, all of whom were born here and then grew up somewhere else, or all of whom are citizens through a parent but grew up somewhere else, then so be it, right? As sports fans, we just want the best possible team. But that's not in this. First of all, it's questionable whether or not that's in the spirit of international soccer. And second of all, what would it say about what we're doing here in this country? 347, you're on the air. Try again.
Hey, what's going on, man? It's Eddie in Brooklyn.
Hey,
for some reason, you kind of just tapped out on me.
Oh, all right. Sorry about that, Eddie. What's up?
No, I have a question, and I kind of want to tap into your brain because I'm trying to learn myself how everybody's taking this Julian Green thing, because I obviously have my own opinion about it. But let me ask you, Julian Green, 4 years from now, he's been with the national team. He scores a big goal, kind of like Joel Campbell did against Manchester United.
Okay.
What do you think the narrative is going to be? Are they going to say an American scored? Or do you think they're going to try and tie in that German thing?
It always defaults to the simplest explanation. And I'll tell you, I had a fascinating sort of experience with this. You know the former Galaxy and Crew player. Why am I blanking on his name? He's English, but he's got Trinidad heritage. He's the white guy on Trinidad and Tobago, if you know what I'm talking about. I'm trying to remember names. He's played in MLS. I wrote a piece, this is a couple years back. I wrote a piece in which I identified him as English bred or English raised or something like that. And an English editor, went behind me and changed it to Trinidad and Tobago national, whatever. Okay. So despite the fact that this player, and again, I apologize for not remembering his name. Chris Burchell. Exactly. Chris Burchell. Despite the fact that Chris Burchell was English by every other definition except for who he played for internationally, this English editor changed it to a TNT International. So what I'm saying is, when we talk about this game, we go to what it says on the paper. So when Julian Green scores a big goal and it says U.S. International, that's the thing that people are going to point to. Now, if there's more time or they want to, for whatever reason, sort of undercut that, they may say, he was born in Florida and raised in Germany and played in the Bayern Munich system. They could do that. But I think that for most people, and most people who aren't necessarily interested in all of examining that, he's just going to be a U.S. International Julian Green.
Okay. No, because my main thing is, like, all right, Campbell scores his goal, and that, in turn, that's going to turn scouts and people are going to start maybe looking deeper into Costa Rican players, and maybe that'll lead to more opportunities for us in Europe.
Sure, I see what you're saying.
But, I always keep hearing people say, well, if they try to undercut and they try to use the whole German thing, it doesn't matter. That they could care less about how people view American players in Europe, but then they turn around and in the next breath complain that American players don't get enough opportunities at the club level in Europe. Mm-hmm. But it's because of that perception that's being created that American players don't necessarily perform at that kind of level, that they don't have that kind of technical ability. So I wanted to know, do you think Julian Green can help displace all that perception, or is it in the end going to get undercut and be like, well, he's not really an American player? You
know what? You've got a point. And I think when it comes to scouts and clubs looking at Americans, I think that the element that he is German raised and Bayern bred is going to be a factor. So, yeah, I don't think that will necessarily have a reflective impact on how teams view American players. I think you're right about that. I think that's going to take somebody like Mark Pelosi it's interesting, though, because the flip side of that coin, Eddie, is again, Zelalem, who I don't want I'm not crowning him anything, but if he does become a regular at Arsenal or any big club and is a star on any level, there is, again, some ownership of what he's become for American soccer. I mean, not all of it,
Definitely.
but I don't know that scouts will. Well, I guess scouts will. Scouts are paid to know. So, and obviously, Danny Carbassiun, who we have on this show, is out there looking for American talent right now. So some of that will filter through the club system. But in terms of the general zeitgeist and the way that Europe looks at American players, I don't even know if it's impacted by Zelalem, who, again, played a lot of soccer here, learned a lot of soccer here. It's an interesting question. Thanks for the call, Eddie. Appreciate it, man.
All right, man. It's okay.
All right. 301, you're on the air.
Hey, Jason, this is Pablo from DC. How are you doing?
What's up, man?
Hey, thanks for taking the call. I came in a little bit late to the show. I just saw your interview with on the dual nationals, or that you have for the national team. First of all, this is like you said, a very it could become a really controversial topic of discussion when it comes to nationality in whatever type of sports setting or any type of setting. But I think you've done a great job of handling that. But I guess as a American with a Mexican background, I've seen this discussion sometimes take very what's the word, xenophobic, if you will.
It can. It can. That's the trouble, right, Pablo? That's the issue with this discussion, is that at some point it starts to sound like you're saying we don't want that guy because he's not quote unquote American, when that's really not the issue. And remember that this is sports, and ultimately it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. And again,
correct. But
go ahead.
When it comes to national teams, I think we're treating sometimes the national team as a club, and it's not a club. It's a team that represents a country, and people who are either naturalized or born in the U.S. Anyway, they're all considered Americans. They all have the right to vote, the right to join the military, to pay taxes.
Yes.
And who are we, in a sense, to say, well, you were born like Julian Green in the U.S., but had to move to Germany because it was out of his control.
Right.
Now we don't consider you as American because you were not raised in the American soccer system. That is not fair, especially for a country like America. I mean, we are always going to have the immigrant kind of aspect in our team, and that's what we are out of our country doing it. So making the distinction of you're in the American system, but not, I don't think it applies to the national team.
Well, look, Pablo, all I'm saying is, look, I'm never going to advocate for the national team to not have dual internationals in it, or to say that somebody should be excluded on a technicality because of where they played. They learn their soccer. I'm not saying that. That's xenophobic.
Yeah.
That is xenophobic.
No, you're correct.
But what I will say is, again, and this is where the line is. This is where the line is difficult to find. Where is it okay to sort of say, it's great Julian Green's in our team, I hope he makes us better, but I'm a little bit more proud if Luis Gil becomes a star? Do you know what I'm saying? As an American living here, watching a soccer grow in this country, is it wrong for me to say I want Luis Gil to be a star, and I'm going to take a little bit more pride out of that than if Julian Green's a star?
No, I think you're right. I think you can take more pride in it, but not deriding Julian Green of the world.
No, not doing that.
That's I totally agree with you on that aspect. As a soccer fan, it makes you proud. As a normal American, I really wouldn't care as long as Julian Green has decided to join the U.S. for his nationality or respect towards American nationality. I think that's, for me, it's fine. Especially,
I agree.
That's my point. But I think you've done a great job on managing this very touchy subject, if you will. So thanks for doing that.
I appreciate it, Pablo. I appreciate it. Again, it's difficult. And look, Gringo Mark on Twitter with an excellent point. No one talks about how Messi is a Spanish product because he went to Barcelona at 11. He's just Argentinian, period. That's a very good point. I mean, there for whatever reason, it's difficult to, it's a moving target. It really is. I appreciate the call, Pablo. Thanks a lot, man.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks.
You're on the air. I'm not sure who this is. What's up?
Hey, how you doing, Jason? It's Washington.
Hey, Washington. What's up, man?
Hey, listen. So, I'm not talking about Julian Green in particular, but all dual nationals. I don't have a problem with dual nationals. I don't think I agree with the statement you made that as long as we win, it doesn't matter who's on the team, whether they're dual nationals or not. I don't agree with that. What I do agree with, and I know that America is made up of immigrants, and we have that history. I'm a product. My parents are immigrants, but my issue is this: if you consider the United States your home, then you're an American, right? You came over here as
Yes.
an immigrant, whatever. Then you're an American.
Right.
If you are playing for the and if you're playing for the United States because it somehow benefits you. See, I have a problem with dual nationals when they have to think about which country they're gonna represent.
Well, look, but
When
Washington.
they have to hold on. When they have to when it's a big thing. Oh wow, I wonder which country he's going to
Okay.
go for. And I also have it when you've already represented, like in the case of Julian Green and others, in the youth level, you've already represented that other country.
Okay.
I have a problem with that because it should not be an issue. If you feel American, it should not even be a question.
Okay.
I'm going to represent the United States no matter what.
Okay.
Because that's where I feel akin to you. That's when I feel like you're one of mine. If you have to think about it, then you're not one of mine. That's just the way I feel.
That's interesting. You've sort of got. I mean, look, Alexi's a little bit more subtle about it, saying it's got to be in your heart. You got to believe it. You got to want to play for the U.S. and represent the U.S. But you sort of got an Alexi Lawless opinion on this, and it is interesting because you point out Julian Green, but Aaron Johansson is certainly in that camp, and there are a lot of guys who did represent other countries before eventually switching to the U.S. I mean, the modern world, and I've sort of pushed that issue to the side because I can't worry about it, Washington. These guys are making cynical career decisions in some cases. And it's not, the problem is, again, getting into their head. Can't do it. Can't know what's in Aaron Johansson's head. How American does Aaron Johansson feel? I have no idea. And it's not really for me to judge. You said, if the United States is your home, you're American, and you want to represent the U.S., that's great. Don't do this wishy-washy nonsense. But again, maybe Aaron Johansson always felt American, never thought he'd get a chance to play for the U.S., decided to play for Iceland.
That's a possibility, but how probable is that?
Well, I mean, even if the probability is very small, you can't know. I mean, that's the thing. We just can't know, Washington. I appreciate the phone call.
All right, take care.
All right, Vince from Toronto, what's up? You're on the air, man.
Oh, hey, Jason.
It's been suggested, and I think you might have seen this on Twitter. It's been suggested that I limit you to like 3 phone calls a week, Vince. Should we do that?
This is my third one, though.
Okay. All right, your third one of the week. So you're cut off after this. It's Friday, so it's perfect timing. What's on your mind, Canadian voice of reason?
Well, I mean, this is interesting. I mean, it applies to Canada as well, right? Because we are a nation of immigrants at the end of the day. But there's so many different ways to approach this, Jason. I mean, you got to the best striker that was born in the U.S. doesn't play for the U.S., and that's Giuseppe Rossi, in my opinion. The best midfielder that's been ever born in Canada doesn't represent Canada, and that's Owen Hargreaves, Jason. As much as I hate him, he is the greatest player that Canada has probably ever produced.
Yeah, who's your goalkeeper? Because he's not the best goalkeeper you could have. Right now.
I guess Asmir Begovic, although he wasn't born in Canada.
No, but he could have represented. Okay, again, and this kind of brings me to a point I wanted to make. Does being born in the country make you that nationality? Again, Aaron Johansson, born here.
No, Jason, it does not. Look at Juan Agudelo. He's born in Colombia. He's as American as American gets, Jason.
Of course. And there's a litany of guys. We just went over it with Elliot. I mean, Tab Ramos and Pablo Mastroeni and Benny Feilhaber and all of these guys. Born other places. Diego Fagundes is American. I mean, despite the fact that his dad is from Uruguay, and he immigrated here. He's American. So again, but he's not eligible for the national team. So that, again, sort of this muddy water that we have to try to divine things out of. We have to look into and say, okay, well, look, he's American because he's got paperwork that says so, but he's not, even though he's lived in the United States for 20 years. I mean, where's the line? How do we decide how American this team is or is not? I guess we can. I guess it's just sort of out there.
No, you're absolutely right, Jason. I mean, it is interesting how U.S. immigration works and what makes you an American and what doesn't. And what it seems to be, it's not whether or not you feel American. It's whether or not you have connections to America. In the sense that yes, right. Aaron Johansson, he was born in Alabama, but he was raised in Iceland. Mixed discount. He's born in Norway, but by virtue of having a mother from Arizona, he's able to represent the United States.
Right.
And I agree with Alexi Lawless in the sense that you have to show, and you have to show your heart, and you have to show on the pitch. And I do believe someone like Mixed Discount has shown that he loves playing for the United States and he wants to play for that country. You see someone else like Fabian Johnson, who every time he plays, he's playing very well. You get the feeling that he enjoys it. Terrence Boyd is the biggest advocate for German Americans. He loves to play for the U.S. He has a tattoo of the American flag. He basically he's a recruiter for the United States, saying, "Hey, come play for us. You'll love it."
Right.
There was an interview that I remember reading that he gave when we were talking about John Brooks and whether or not he would represent the United States. where he said that it doesn't matter where you come from, because as soon as you go there, you start feeling American, whatever that means.
Right.
And you feel like a family, which is not something you necessarily get, if you're German, with the German teams. Does that mean being German means you're cold, calculated, and a machine? Maybe. I don't know, Jason, but
no, I don't think
many ways to look at it.
I don't think you're allowed to do that. I think that's out of bounds. But
no, of course.
But look, what you say about the way Terrence Boyd has expressed his feeling about this team, and I imagine something that is part of Julian Green's decision, and Jermaine Jones, and Danny Williams, and all of these guys, and Aaron Johansson. That's a credit to the national team. It's a credit to all of the guys who were there before those guys arrived, whether they were born here or not. So it's again sort of a microcosm of, look, an idealized America. We know America's got problems. We know America's got immigration issues right now. But in sort of the idealized notion of what America is supposed to be as a melting pot, this works. And I think it's something to be celebrated in almost every way. But again, we get down to that level of, where is American soccer going? And in order to be a world power, does the United States have to develop top-level talent within the country, or is it just going to be, look, we've got an American military that's been all over the world. We've got people coming here all the time to study and to work. So we're going to end up with all of these sort of, I don't want to say they're all Americans. I mean, we're going to end up with these Americans who are ultimately grow up somewhere else. Is that going to be the path? Is that going to be the path to glory, Vince, for the United States? Is it? I don't think it is.
Like, Jason, I think, like, whenever someone says that, we have to develop our game in the U.S., I think that's BS, Jason. Lionel Messi developed his game in Barcelona.
Sure, but
Spain asked
Vince,
him, do you want to represent Spain? He said, no,
sure.
I'm Argentinian. I'm going to represent Argentina. There's so many players, Jason, that develop their games abroad, but they play for their country of birth because they still have that connection.
I realize that. I just mentioned Messi. Absolutely. He is on that list, and we see what's happening with Diego Costa, who is Brazilian and is going to play for Spain. Look, this isn't a U.S.-only issue, but the difference with Messi, and the thing I'll point out, is that he could have gone and joined the academy at a club in Argentina, at Boca or River or Newell's, and turned into an amazing player and represented Argentina. So he got identified by scouts at Barcelona who were willing to pay for his hormone therapy, and that's why he ended up in Spain and even had that decision to be made. But the basic level of soccer in Argentina, the type of player they're producing, is already high enough that that's incidental. Whereas what we're talking about with the United States is there's a sense that in order to get over the hump, the United States is going to have to get more players like Julian Green, who are born and raised in another country and go through a system at a top club there. That's different. That's fundamentally different, Vince.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, You got guys developing their game. Mark Pelosi and that other guy. I think he's from Bulgaria, who's also American. Both of them developing their game at Liverpool. You got Dwayne Holmes at Huddersfield. You got a number of players who aren't developing their game in the U.S., but they are American. And the way I feel about it, Jason, if you got those people who are saying, like, we need more Luis Gills, more of Giangios, guys developing their game at the expense of someone who is American but developed their game elsewhere, then they're blowing smoke out of where the sun don't shine.
Sure. And look,
it's the best of both worlds, Jason. You get those Luis Gills, you get those DeAndre Edmonds, and you get those Mark Pelosi's, and those all those players. If they want to represent the U.S., that's great. If their play on the field shows that they want to play for the U.S., that's even better. And the more talent, the better, right, Jason?
Absolutely. And you're right. Is there a difference? Is there a real difference between Julian Green and Mark Pelosi, Julian Green and Sebastian Letget, Julian Green and Hyman's kid at Fulham? Is there a real significant difference? I mean, we're talking about a cultural experience, but they're all American, and they're essentially learning to be professionals outside of the United States. So while it's sort of the gut instinct is to say Mark Pelosi is an American product while Julian Green's a German product, that might not necessarily be the way to look at it. Although Pelosi was 18, so it's a little different. There's some guys who went over younger who we certainly could ask that question of. I appreciate the call, Vince. Thanks a lot, man.
No problem.
All right, moving on. It is an open question. We will talk about it continually because it is part of the world's game now. And this, again, it's not just an American issue. I mean, if Spain, the reigning world champions, the reigning European champions, the world's greatest national team at the moment until they are dethroned, is reaching out to Diego Costa to bring him in as a striker because they need help there, and he is Brazilian by birth and soccer upbringing, then that shows you where the direction the wind is blowing for this international game. 313, you're on the air.
Hey, Jason, it's Isaac from Pittsburgh.
Hey, Isaac, what's up, man?
I just wanted to make sure you saw the breaking news. Jurgen Klinsmann just convinced President Obama to approve a troop surge in Germany. Now, what this is going to do, this is all part of his master plan to, now he gets to circumvent this clunky American soccer development system. And, so now we get the best of the best. They get to play in the creme de la creme, and, we excel at the World Cup.
You make a joke, Isaac, but
I'm doing a very poor job at it. But really what I'm calling to do is ask the question, where does this stop? My nightmare scenario is that, we get all these European, bred mercenaries, European developed mercenaries, and do better than ever at the World Cup. What does that mean for the U.S.-based soccer development, MLS,
Well, look, Isaac, I'll say this. I think the coach has to make difficult decisions. In this case, it's Klinsmann has to make difficult decisions about where the tipping point is, how much is too much, whether or not he's got inherent biases. And I'm not putting this on Klinsmann, but whether or not he's got inherent biases that somebody needs to talk to him about when it comes down to bringing in dual internationals. Like the German-American contingent versus maybe going and giving an opportunity to a player who's in MLS or who started in MLS and is somewhere else now. Again, these are difficult questions. And while we can sort of debate them philosophically, it's up to that guy in charge, in this case, Klinsmann, to find the line and make sure he's not going over the line. Because at some point, and this is, I'm building a bit of a straw man here, but at some point, someone's going to say, because this is the polarized America we live in, some commentator is going to say, this is an American national team. Look at all of them. They're all from Germany. They're from Iceland. They're not American. And that's going to be a problem in terms of perception. I don't know that it's a problem in terms of competition, but it will change the way some people look at the U.S. national team program. So there's certainly a line. You can't cross it. I don't know where it is.
Well, my feeling is that, when you cross that line, and I have, just as a definite idea or indefinite of an idea of what that line is as you do, but, that the American program will suffer as a result because, our programs overseas or, our overseas outreach is doing the job for us.
I think that it's good that Klinsmann has a contract extension. It has a mandate to make fundamental changes and bring this, whether you like his stewardship or not, what you can say is because he's got job security, he can afford to give opportunities to MLS players or players who grew up here while at the same time sort of mining that area of dual internationals. He can play both sides, whereas a coach who is on a short-term contract or doesn't know if he's going to be re-signed or is under immense pressure just to win would default to what is the most obvious talent, and that's going to be the dual internationals who came through places like Bayern Munich and Borussia Dortmund. So I think that there's some saving grace there in the fact that Klinsmann is giving a larger mandate, Isaac. Appreciate it, man.
Hey, thanks for taking my call.
I appreciate it. All right, we got to take a break. When we come back, we will grab our friend Eric Gomez, talk about the Mexican national team roster for the friendly on Wednesday against the U.S., other Liga MX news on the docket as well. Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV.
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on NASN with Jason Davis.
Joining me via telephone, Eric Gomez, our Mexican soccer expert. Eric Gomez, Fox is his Twitter handle. Go follow him for all of his coverage of Mexican soccer. He's going to talk to us first about this roster for the U.S. national team game in Phoenix, the game against the U.S. national team. Hi, Eric. How are you?
Good morning.
Good
Doing
morning.
great. How about you?
I'm good. All right. So Miguel Herrera has called up 18 players for the game against the U.S. This is just like with Jurgen Klinsmann and the U.S. national team, an opportunity to pick out a couple players to watch. I think that there were no surprises in the U.S. team, and the only real omission people are talking about is one in Benny Feilhaber. There are a couple of notable omissions from Herrera's team for this game. Who are they, and what does it mean for their chances?
Yeah, let's start with the funny one, and that's Juan Jose Vasquez of León, young central midfielder, been coming up through the ranks for León. Of course, they won the championship last year. They're in the Copa Lib. He can't travel because he couldn't get a visa in the U.S. Draw your own conclusions there. I have no idea what's going on.
Okay.
With Vasquez, but he can't make it to the game for that particular reason. Then, Oribe Peralta just feels like he's been overworked at the league level, at the also Copa Lib level, not to mention the national team. He asked Herrera and Santos for a few days off with his family. Those were granted, and Oribe Peralta will not be at the game. And then Jesus Corona, the goalkeeper from Cruz Azul, he's not going to be there, as he has asked the national team to allow him to play in the CONCACAF Champions League semifinal against Tijuana, which is odd because, you're keeping the your best defensive player with the squad, but you're taking the best offensive player from the squad into the national team, and that's Marco Fabian. Fabian, Cruz Azul, obviously going to be there. The absences are important for Mexico, but there are also a few guys that are interesting in the way that they've been selected and how we expect them to play for Mexico. One of those guys is Alan Pulido, young 22-year-old striker from Tigres. He's been on fire over the last 6 or 8 months. Started against Korea, I believe, and scored a hat-trick in his national team debut. Hasn't cooled off since then. He'll be a very interesting player to watch because usually U.S. defenses are used to the prototypical Mexican striker, which is the Jared Borghetti type, the Oribe Peralta type, the guy who, whereas he is a little mobile, is likely to be in the box, stationed for most of the game. Pulido is not like that at all. Pulido is just very difficult to deal with, more in the mold of a Chicharito type striker who's just, bopping around everywhere he pops up where you least expect him. So that's going to be very interesting to watch.
Yeah, the Peralta and Corona absences, as you mentioned, Corona for club reasons, Peralta for rest reasons. Both those guys are going to be going to Brazil, so there's no issues there at all. It's just a matter of who steps up and takes their opportunity. So Pulido will certainly be one to watch. You mentioned Marco Fabian, 24 years old, obviously lots of promise for American audiences. We just watched what he did for Cruz Azul against Sporting Kansas City, and it wasn't pretty for the American side. What are his chances of being able to turn it on and make this World Cup team? Is there a spot for him? It's a loaded team attacking wise.
There is a spot for him, but I think the overarching description for Fabian is that he's inconsistent. And whereas he is on fire right now, you don't know which version of Marco Fabian you're going to get once June rolls around. And there's a very clear precedent for this. Before the Olympic Games in London, Fabian scored 17 goals in the prior tournaments, the CONCACAF qualifying tournament, Toulon in France, and also a few scattered friendlies before the Olympic Games even started. Once London 2012 started for the Mexican national team, he scored 1 goal and was pretty much a secondary player to Giovanni Dos Santos and obviously Oribe Peralta. Not the type of player that you want handling your business if you're the Mexican national team in crunch time, just because you don't know which version of Fabian you're going to get. Now, a lot of people were stating that the fact that he was still at Chivas was basically bringing him down. This was not a team suited for his talent and his type of play. And then they bring him to Cruz Azul. They also pair him up with Luis Fernando Tena, who managed him with the U23 side, and he finds his feet again. So is there a spot for him? Absolutely. Does he have to show that he's capable of not just bringing the heat, but keeping that fire on for several months at a time? Absolutely. And I think Miguel Herrera is very, very skeptical, and that's why he asked Cruz Azul, and he also asked Fabian himself, to say, you know what, this is a big game. This is your chance. Show me what you got.
Fabian, a young player with a lot of hype behind him, and there was some speculation he might actually move out of Mexico not that long ago, and as you said, inconsistent, I guess. And if he's with a coach who knows him, that's obviously a benefit. Has sort of the dying down of that hype and the potential of a move, has that helped him in his development at Cruz Azul?
I think so, and I think that what happened there was they started placing him in these top-level European teams when he hadn't shown a top level in Mexico, and that seemed a bit ridiculous. Now, there was talk that Bayern Munich might snap him up for 10 million euros. That was way too much money and way too big of a club. Mm-hmm. Then you moved on to the Premier League. And teams like, more mid-level teams like, sorry about that, more mid-level teams like Aston Villa. Mm-hmm. And the transfer fees were still pretty high.
Yeah.
And then we landed on Qatar. And Qatar was the cherry on top for the Fabian haters, because the one of the big newspapers over there made the mistake of comparing him to Messi. Oh. So they called him the Mexican Messi, and that was Twitter fodder for about a week.
Yeah,
just basically comparing him to Messi. It was terrible. Nothing came to pass, and I think the best thing that could have happened to him was staying in the Liga MX, going to another big club, but another big club that was more suited to his style of play and had better chances to win the title. As it stands right now, Chivas has gotten better with Jose Luis Real, who coached Chivas USA last year, but they're still not a championship caliber team. Cruz Azul is. Mm-hmm. And if he's able to help that team end its 17-year championship drought right on the cusp of the World Cup, I mean, there's no telling what that's going to do to his confidence and what that's going to do to his chances to not just excel for Mexico and Brazil, but to finally move out of Mexico and find a spot with a European side.
It's going to be fun again, Eric, to have an MLS versus Liga MX referendum right after the Champions League, which obviously indicated and proved for everybody that MLS teams have a long way to go before they can compete with the top Mexican teams in that competition. And in this game, we get an almost entirely MLS-based team, well, mostly MLS-based team with a couple of Liga MX players in it, and one foreign-based player versus a Liga MX team for Mexico. Is this? I mean, I'm tired of the narrative. I mean, I think there's something to be said for the leagues competing against each other in big competitions. I'm not sure this is the case, but it'll be fun, I suppose, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we're not that far off from seeing complete parity between those two leagues, and I think the most important part of this equation is the one that's staring us in the face and has been since 1996, and that is the calendar. And Jurgen Klinsmann, I mean, he said it today, or at least what he said was published today by MLS, and says, we need to start earlier so that we have a competitive edge, or that we at least have competitive parity against Liga MX. And I completely agree. The issue is, the quality of the players, I believe, is unquestioned, because MLS remains the base for the U.S. men's national team, and the U.S. men's national team is very much on par with Mexico, and it's a seesaw battle where sometimes Mexico is ahead, sometimes the U.S. is ahead. So once we go into this friendly on April 2nd, it becomes more or less how much have these leagues helped the national teams progress in the last, 6-8 months since they last saw each other, and how does that help or hinder, for instance, Mexico from their foreign-based player argument. It used to be that Mexican media, Mexican fans, and even Mexican players clamored for the opportunity to be stationed at teams like Villarreal and Barcelona and Manchester United and all these big clubs, and now it's become a hindrance. And, the irony of it doesn't escape anybody. But now that we have 18 guys strictly from the Liga MX and, 13, 14 guys from MLS on the other side, it's more it's more a chance to see how much we've progressed as, Mexico and the U.S. national teams, and what these players who are on the bubble will be able to provide their respective national team managers as we get closer and closer to the World Cup. But for Mexico, it's a little bit of a dangerous proposition because so many of these players are from America and León, the last two league champions. Obviously, Miguel Herrera coaching America to that title in 2013. These aren't the same teams. These players, whereas still talented, not really at the same level as we saw them a few months ago. And this is not even the same team that beat up on New Zealand, if you're talking about Mexico, to get to the World Cup. So how's that going to affect the pundits and Herrera himself into saying, well, I was very much satisfied with bringing in my old team and the last league champion to build this national team. Now I'm going to have to look elsewhere and look at the Aldo de Nigris type guys. Look at, Chicharito and Giovanni Dos Santos and say, how am I going to mesh these two styles of play and these two leagues or these two concepts into a cogent World Cup squad? I don't think Klinsmann has that problem. So the onus is going to be on Mexico to show that the Liga MX guys are capable of doing anything. And if they go in there and they go into Arizona and they beat Klinsmann's team, that's going to be a huge, huge bonus for Herrera in his relationship with the press and the fans.
I'll be interested to watch. Look, if there's any friendly that's more than a friendly, it's obviously this one. And I wonder how much pressure there is. I actually think that Klinsmann is pretty relaxed about this game, despite the fact it's USA Mexico. Partly because he didn't grow up in it, and it's really, for him, the USA job is a project. I wonder how much Herrera will be affected by it, and do you believe that he will be as committed? He's going to be just flat out committed to his system and running things his way to see how they do, or is there going to be some response to what the Americans do? And I guess it's possible the Americans could do the same thing.
Oh, there should be some nervousness on Herrera's part, and I'll tell you why. I mean, he's coached 5 matches with the national team, and the first 4 matches were blowouts. Now, he didn't score less than 4 goals in those games. 5th game is against Nigeria. Nigeria, obviously, a very solid squad, a very important team in the African fold. Regular World Cup team, 0-0. And that was a game that featured most of the players that we expect to see in Brazil. So, again, the onus is on Herrera to prove that he's not just this explosive, balls to the wall type coach who's going to put 3 or 4 or 5 offensive players up against your defense at every point during the game, but to prove that he's a decent enough tactician and motivator to be able to guide this team into Brazil beyond the regular 4-game stint and not to regress. That is the big fear in Mexico right now, that Mexico is going to somehow regress from 1994 onwards and not get out of the group stage. And you know what? It is a very, very distinct possibility.
Sure.
Not only are you just facing Brazil, but Croatia has a bevy of talented players. And to forget or to dismiss Cameroon, especially after that 0-0 against Nigeria, is stupid. So Mexico has a very, very difficult task on their hands. And to win against the United States, we very, very much know that Mexico and Mexican culture and Mexicans themselves, this is riding on confidence. It's not just riding on talent. It's riding on confidence. So this is a very dangerous friendly for Mexico to go into Arizona against a team that is, as you say, relaxed, but with 10 or 15 guys vying for a World Cup spot. They're not going to take it easy on anybody. This is El Clásico. This is the most important game in CONCACAF and one of the 10 biggest national team rivalries in the world. How would it be for Mexico if they get out of Arizona with a 2-0 loss, another 2-0, or even worse? It would be devastating, especially because now with guys like Dempsey and Donovan and Bradley and all of these big name players making it back to MLS, it opens up that argument for Liga MX versus MLS. It's not a tired narrative. It's an ongoing narrative.
Sure.
And I know that for most MLS fans, it seems tired because you just lost those 3 big CONCACAF Champions League series, but it's huge. I mean, it's absolutely huge for everybody involved.
I do think it's interesting. You mentioned the sort of the change in attitude about sending young players, especially abroad from Mexico, and sort of realizing that that's not always the best situation. Whereas United States men's national team has players coming back from Europe to play in MLS, and we're going through this hand-wringing over whether that's the best thing for them and the best thing for the national team. And it's sort of coalescing to this idea, and for very different reasons, that Mexico's going to, I don't know. Mexico's always had, the Mexican teams and the Mexican players have always had that issue of whether or not they should leave Mexico, and whether or not Mexican soccer is the type that travels. And American soccer is maybe learning that it's not always good to travel. It's an interesting dynamic. Let's before I have to let you go, Eric, let's talk a little bit on what's happening in Liga MX, and I'm going to start with the bad. Last weekend, there were some fan violence. Guadalajara and Atlas fans, if I understand it correctly, at Estadio Jalisco. Yep. And what's the fallout from that fan violence? And I read today that perhaps the government's going to take some action.
Yeah, there's an initiative that's being voted into law in the Mexican Congress, basically stating that any person who is liable of fan violence within a stadium can be subjected to very extreme measures, 20 years in prison. They're going to treat it as attempted murder. 20 years in prison for anybody who decides that they're going to, just make a mess within any Mexican League stadium. Mm-hmm. I mean, these images, they went around the world. I mean, it's been very troubling for Mexico to reconcile the fact that they are this growing league, that they're opening up corporate sponsorship, that they're selling their league name to one of the biggest banks in the world, and then to have one of their biggest games of the season turn into a melee in the stands and have two police officers critically wounded and just basically clinging to life. This on the heels of, that was the Guadalajara derby last week. This week you've got Chivas versus America, which is the Mexican Clásico. Mm-hmm. If that turned into a melee, what's going to happen when the two biggest and most passionate fan bases in the country get together in Guadalajara on Sunday? That is the biggest fear that they have. Obviously, they took action against Atlas, who operate Estadio Jalisco. They're not going to be able to play in that stadium for just a defined period of time. They haven't even stated how much that's going to be. Big fines coming down, and Jorge Vergara, Chivas owner, everybody knows him well, has taken his own measures and said that there's not going to be any organized fan groups allowed into his stadium as long as he's owning Chivas. So big fallout there, but there is the feeling that the Liga MX should take bigger action, and they should adopt a model that maybe would be unpopular with fans, which is to say the English model, to jack up prices so you keep the riffraff out, or to dole out stiffer penalties for teams that aren't willing to shell out money for protection from police officers and security guards.
Yeah,
it's very troubling, and it's something that's not going to go away. It hasn't gone away for a while now, and it can only get worse if nobody acts. So here's hoping that this is resolved quickly, but it won't be. And here's hoping that it doesn't spread to MLS or any other league that's trying to make a name for itself on the international stage.
Yeah, you and I had a little brief discussion before we came on the air about what would happen if this happened in MLS, and you said you can't see it happening, whereas I'm just not that positive that we won't have an incident. Now, I don't know how big it will be. I don't expect police to be injured. I don't expect it to reach riot level that we might see in another place in a different part of the world. But I do think that any sort of violence between fan groups, and there's been isolated incidents in MLS, but anything that reaches the local news level will just blow up and become a major issue for soccer. And I admonish American soccer fans on a regular basis, do not get involved in any violence. Don't even think about it. I mean, you want to hate that guy on the other side in the other colors? That's absolutely fine. Hate him all you want. Don't go punch him, because it's only going to hurt the game in this country in ways it can't hurt the game in Mexico, despite the fact that it is troubling, Eric.
Yeah, absolutely. And I still think that the scale is probably the most important thing that we should talk about. Little things can crop up and they can get bigger and bigger at a moment's notice, at the drop of a hat. But I still think that the culture in the United States for soccer
has not reached this level of displacing passion for violence.
Mm-hmm.
And whether that does happen or not is dependent on the fans.
Yeah.
It's dependent on who wants to be the representative of U.S. soccer at the fan level. And, that is something that if the United States fans that come down to Mexico are shocked and appalled and angered by the fact that they get, bags of urine thrown at them and they get these really nasty comments hurled their way, don't retaliate.
Right.
Take the high road. Don't bring that to your league, because I'm telling you this, stationed here in Mexico City and watching how these police operations go as far as maintaining security in stadiums. They don't allow you to bring belts into the stadium at Azteca, at Olímpico, at Estadio Azul. Media members get searched routinely because there have been occasions where this has gotten so out of hand that you'll have one of these guys fake writing for a blog get a media accreditation. I'm serious. This has happened.
It's crazy.
At Estadio Azul. And just bring stuff into the stadium, hand it out to the fans, and boom, you have instant weapons. I mean, that is just absolute expletive.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
This can't happen, and in the United States, it can't start to happen. So, let this be a warning to everybody. Don't tarnish the game. Don't tarnish the game, because, at least in the United States, I don't think that you'll get a second opportunity to go back into a stadium. You won't get a second opportunity to root for your team the way that you've been paying or blessed enough to do so. In Mexico, it might be a different story. Here's hoping that changes quickly.
Yep. Eric Gomez from down to Mexico City. Eric Gomez Fox on Twitter. Go follow him for all his coverage of Mexican soccer. He's going to be a fascinating follow leading up to USA Mexico, as always. Thanks for your time, Eric. I appreciate it, man.
Thanks for having me on.
Have a good weekend. There you go. Eric Gomez joining us, as he does fairly regularly. And again, don't mistake violence for passion. Let's not do that. Okay, I just talked about that long form piece at SB Nation on the Portland-Seattle rivalry. I think as long as that is a heated rivalry that does not cross certain lines, it's a great asset for American soccer. Clearly, MLS believes that. Clearly, Seattle fans and Portland fans, they know how much their rivalry brings to the league and the profile of the league and how big MLS feels. Rivalries help MLS feel bigger. Those fan rivalries can help MLS feel bigger. But the second you mistake violence for passion will be the second that the organized supporters culture in America ends. Because teams won't be able to afford to allow organized fan groups to gather, because there'll be lawsuits. There'll be the liability will be insane. And I'm telling you that it's unfair, but it's a fact that soccer is going to get judged harsher than any other American sport. When a fan of Team A beats up a fan of Team B in the NFL or NBA or Major League Baseball or college sports, it's an isolated incident. It's sad. We all talk about how terrible it is. That rivalry's gotten out of control, and we move on. If there is anything that resembles hooliganism, because it still pervades, hooliganism hasn't been an issue in England in 20 years. And yet, the notion that there will be hooligans running around if a soccer team starts up in the neighborhood still pervades. Go read the comments on some of these stadium discussions, like at the New York Post or Newsday or anywhere across the country. I don't want to just pick on New York. Now, maybe that's hating on soccer just to hate on soccer. Maybe those people they don't really believe that there will be hooligans running around. But they see what's happening with the Barra Bravas in Argentina, and they remember the stories of English hooligans, and they immediately jump to the conclusion that's what soccer is. We know it's not. But if you give them an excuse to think it's that way, the hammer will come down. The hammer will come down, and that'll be the end of this supporters group and that supporters group and all of the fun that we've started to inject into American soccer over the past 5, 6, 7 years. Everything that came around when Toronto joined the league and Seattle got started and Portland jumped in and Sons of Ben willed a team into Philadelphia. All that stuff will end. And it will be every other American sport. It'll be boring. It'll be boring. It'll be soccer. It'll be fun. I'll still watch, but it'll be boring. We can try to sing. You won't be organized anymore. Your TIFO will be gone. You don't want that. So that's the lesson here that Eric is trying to convey. Thing today as we close out an excellent week of Soccer Morning. I love this story. Rio Ferdinand is embarrassed to leave his house. Rio Ferdinand doesn't want to leave his house. It's embarrassing. It becomes a personal insult. I don't want to go out when the game is finished and you even stop watching TV. I don't want to take my kids to school. I don't want to walk on the school path and think I'm hearing things or seeing people look at me because we lost a game. I don't want to fill up my car with petrol or go to the shops. It gets personal and everyone looking at you and talking about the results and the form and stuff. You don't want to live like that. You want to live freely. All right. First of all, I don't really feel sorry for Rio Ferdinand. Come on. You're okay, Rio. You'll be fine. Second of all, Manchester United fans are planning a protest with a plane to fly a message. Moyes out. He's not the chosen one. Whatever the message is going to be. Wrong one. Moyes out. It's going to be the best. Seriously, guys. This is why everybody else hates you. Don't act entitled. Yeah, okay, Manchester United has a standard and they're not living up to it this year. But hiring a plane, Moyes out. Go buy your ticket, go watch your team. Chant Moyes out. Hold up a banner, hold up a sign outside of the stadium. You're flying a plane over Old Trafford to get your seriously. I think there's a line here and I think they're crossing it. Not every Manchester United fan feels this way, I know. It's a couple of people putting together the cash. I wonder if there's like one rich benefactor. You know what would be amazing? Is if somebody who covets the United job, some manager who covets the United job is making a secret contribution to fly the plane and says Moyes out. That would be amazing. That would be the best soccer conspiracy ever. That would be fantastic. All right. Speaking of fantastic, ratings and reviews on iTunes are fantastic for Soccer Morning. I want to thank everybody who listened to the show this week. Thank everybody who gave us music for the show this week, or for the show this week. Thanks to Elliot Turner and Eric Gomez for appearing on today's program. And we'll be back on Monday. Plenty to talk about MLS, big games in Spain, big games in England. And then we'll get into USA-Mexico week as well. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks to producer Trevor for another good week. And we'll see you on Monday. Bye.
The days on the boulevard I landed. We used to kick routines and the presence was fitting. It was I.